Moving next to Atlanta, where we will watch the SEC championship game, the 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, the 2nd-ranked Texas Longhorns, the second edition of what was one of the great college football games of the season. Texas is a narrow 2.5-point favorite. The total is around 48. This is a 4 o'clock Eastern kick on ABC. There's one instance in the AP poll era where a team defeated the same AP top 5 opponent twice in a season. That was in 1999 when Alabama beat Florida twice. They were ranked number 3 and then number 5 in the 2 games that Alabama beat them. Of course, Texas, they were in the top 5 the last time Georgia beat them. They were actually number 1. So could be a significant opportunity to make some history if Georgia can do it for a second time. Georgia is also trying to become the first team since 1909 to beat Texas twice in the same season. The team that did that back 115 years ago, that was Texas A&M. They beat the Longhorns twice. Let's get into the weeds, shall we? Number 1, can Texas run the football? We know that there has been a legit commitment from Steve Sarkisian and his offensive staff over the last several weeks to become a more balanced offensive attack. And it really came to a head last week with a 50-carry performance against Texas A&M. 50 carries against the Aggies. If you would have told me that Steve Sarkisian was going to hand it off or run the football 50 times in the game, I would have said no chance. He's a quarterback. Why would he do that? Well, he has now evolved, and this offense has evolved to becoming extremely balanced. On those 50 carries, they went for 240. Trey Wisner led the way, 186 yards on 33 carries. But you look at their last time they played against Georgia, and this is really before they made that commitment, they had 29 yards on 27 carries against Georgia the first time around. So this is a different Texas team from an identity standpoint, from a balance standpoint. And at that point, Wisner wasn't even really a featured player in this offense, but he just got 33 carries in one of the biggest games in Texas football recent history. So I would imagine he's going to get 30 carries again if the opportunity presents itself. Look, he's from DeSoto. He's been the lead back. He carried it 26 times for $158 against Kentucky. So this has been going on for a while. And in the red zone too. The red zone is where it's going to be very, very important for them to find hard yards because they can't do what they did last time against Georgia and average 1.1 per carry. That's just not going to work. The good news is we saw last week Georgia has been a little susceptible against the run. And in particular, last week was the quarterback run. So we saw a little Arch Manning package. All right, Steve Sarkisian sends Arch Manning in, goes onto the field for 3 snaps, runs those 3 snaps, 15-yard touchdown run around the left edge, strike out the fight song, right? You think that there's probably another layer to that package? I think it's a safe assumption, right? I think we're going to get that layer this weekend, especially looking at some of the ineptitudes that Georgia's had defending quarterback run at times this year. Now, Georgia's defense over the last 5 games, they have given up on average 176 yards rushing a game. That's the last 5 games. Their first 6 games, they gave up about 120. Well, the last 5, 176. Even UMass ran for 226 against Georgia. Georgia Tech last week, 260 yards. Granted, 8 overtimes, but 260 yards rushing against a Kirby Smart coach defense. Doesn't sound right, does it? Doesn't compute. Can Texas do it with their new identity here in the second go-around against the Dogs? Question 2, can Texas protect? Now, this is one area where Texas, I do think they looked better last week. There is reason to be optimistic that the best is in front of this offensive line from a protection standpoint. I really believe that. But if you look at what's happened against Georgia and how things went against Georgia the first time around, the pressure that Georgia was able to apply, it was a huge problem. So naturally, it's a question that we have going into this one. In Texas, their quarterbacks have been sacked 14 times for a loss of 65 yards in the 5 games since they last played against the Georgia Bulldogs. So it's not like this was an issue that has now been completely alleviated, and it's one that we need to monitor throughout the game. Because if Texas can't protect, that's going to make things really, really interesting for Georgia's pass rush and how hard they want to attack. Question number 3, can Carson Beck carry Georgia to victory? Let's just be real. Let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. This Georgia football team is not a team that is going to be committed to the run. They haven't been to this point. That's 12 games in. Our sample size is pretty dang significant. And I got to be honest with you, they're not a very effective run team. The last time that they played Texas, they were a little bit more effective. They had ETN. ETN now has the rib injury and hasn't been quite as effective, so they've moved a little more towards Nate Frazier, who I think's got a lot of juice, but will put the ball on the deck from time to time. So let's just be real. I don't think Georgia is going to sit there and be super committed to the run game. Just look at their track record. Only 38% of their total yardage comes off the ground. That's 119 in college football. So not a very balanced outfit. That means a lot is going to be put on Carson Beck's shoulders. He's going to have to win this game with his arm. And if you look at Texas, like, you know who they are defensively. They're very simple. They have a bone-crushing structure that will just kill you with execution, and they'll just out-talent you. They have more players. They have better players. Now, maybe they don't have better players than Georgia, but against most teams, they have way better players. So they don't really blitz. They don't really dictate. They don't mix up and play a lot of man coverage. They don't really do a lot of things. They just want to kill you with simplicity, because if they screw it up, then shame on them. Like, make them beat us is their approach that Pete Kwiatkowski has used, and it's been super effective. They eat up the run, they get you behind the sticks, and they wear you out on the edges when you get in obvious passing downs. Now, Texas's structure does force you to win some one-on-one matchups on the outside, which leads us to our next question. Question number 4, who's going to step up at wide receiver for Georgia? And they're just not great at wide receiver. They lead the nation in drops with 36. A vast majority of their yardage comes after the catch. They're one of only 5 teams in the country that have over 2,000 yards after the catch. The most efficient passing game we've seen from Georgia this year was actually against Tennessee. Carson's QBR that night was 98. That was the highest of the season by nearly 7 points. Why was the Tennessee plan of attack so much better throwing the football? Because they leaned heavily into their tight ends in that matchup. They targeted them 13 times that night. They completed 10 for 130 and 2 touchdowns. So will they lean on Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Ben Urosic again in this game? I would assume so. Because Arian Smith, great with the ball in his hands, not your traditional break-you-down receiver. Dominic Lovett, great with the ball in his hands, not your traditional well-rounded, polished receiver. These guys are catch-and-run guys, but they're not super polished. And against Texas, you're probably going to have to win with a little more polish than what we've seen from them at times. Question number 5. Will we see a different Quinn Ewers this time around? If you look back at the game against Georgia, it was probably the worst game of his career. It was. And I think if you even asked him, he'd probably acknowledge that. But at that point, he was banged up. He was rusty. He was coming off an injury. There was a lot of reasons for why he looked a little gun shy. There's a lot of reasons why maybe he was seeing some ghosts. He took 5 sacks in the game. I think at least 3 of those 5 were on him. He threw into traffic. He made bad decisions. He got a chance to ride the Pine Pony for a couple minutes before Arch Manning went back in, and then ultimately he replaced Arch Manning. So will we see a different Quinn Ewers? I think we will. I'd be really surprised if Quinn didn't play well in this game. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to go out and lead his team to victory, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't a much better version of himself in this matchup than he was the last time around. Question number 6. The last time out was a complete turnover fest. All right, will it be again? Texas had 4 turnovers the last time they played. Georgia had 3. The Bulldogs converted on 2 short fields. They turned those 2 short fields into 14 points, and they took advantage of some special teams problems that led to some short fields. Now, Texas converted only 1 Georgia turnover into points. So if it becomes a turnover fest again, which I hope it doesn't, I hate watching games like that. If it does, though, will that favor Georgia because they were a little more opportunistic last time paying off those sudden change opportunities. Trends in the game. Georgia's 11-5 against the spread against top 5 teams under Kirby Smart. However, Georgia is just 3-9 against the spread this season. That's tied for the second worst among Power 4 teams. I think Texas has been a defense that has been outstanding all year, which is why the under has been 8-4 in games they've played this season. I'm taking Texas in a low-scoring game. I know it's dangerous, and I know Kirby Smart will probably call everybody out after the game in victory, but I have to go with the team that I think is more complete. And at this point, I think Texas is more balanced. I think Texas is more complete. I think Texas has an edge on defense, which is not something I often say.